At Gabon's presidential inauguration, one name sparked chaos: Ibrahim Traoré. He wasn't there. He wasn't invited. But when his name was spoken, the crowd exploded. Not for the president, but for him.
Capitaine Ibrahim Traoré, président du Faso.
But why would a foreign leader's name hijack another country's most sacred political event? Let's find out. On the surface, the May 3rd presidential inauguration in Gabon was supposed to be a formality, a neatly packaged ceremony designed for cameras, not citizens. The kind of carefully choreographed performance where the real decisions have already been made in backrooms, and the public is just invited to clap. The man taking the oath, General Brice Oligui Nguema, stood calm and confident. Soldiers stood straight. Delegates wore silk. International observers quietly nodded approval. To the casual observer, everything was in order. But then came the moment that revealed what the polished stage couldn't hide. This wasn't just an inauguration. It was a battlefield wearing a tuxedo. You see, Gabon was trying to sell a narrative, one that says, "We've had our military transition, now let's return to normal." With France on one side, the IMF on the other, and elections sanitized for foreign consumption. The goal was to prove that Gabon is not like Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger, that it's stable, cooperative, and predictable. But that illusion shattered the moment Ibrahim Traoré's name was spoken. It didn't come from an opposition speech or a planned protest. It came quietly, almost innocently, from the lips of a youth speaker delivering remarks on African solidarity. A mention of our brothers in Burkina Faso and their fight for self-determination. And then, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. That was all it took. The reaction was immediate. The youth section of the crowd stirred, then erupted. Shouts echoed. Some started chanting his name, others clapped. A wave moved through the stands like a pulse. For a brief moment, the cameras hesitated, unsure where to look. Ministers sitting in the front row turned to glance nervously. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Traoré wasn't the main character that day. But the crowd decided otherwise. What does this tell us? It tells us that the real story wasn't on stage. It was in the crowd. Gabon's elite tried to present a clean break from chaos, a shift back to polite politics. But what echoed from the streets and the mouths of the youth wasn't politeness. It was resistance. And Traoré's name didn't spark that energy. It revealed it. Like a match dropped into a dark room full of gas. The symbolic weight of that moment cannot be overstated. Traoré isn't Gabonese. He has no military ties there. But his name was louder than the man being sworn in. That's not politics. That's power without permission. Influence without borders. A symbol bigger than any single leader. Because this crowd wasn't just cheering for a person. They were rejecting a performance. They were rejecting the idea that Gabon must always return to the orbit of France when the dust settles. That after every military shakeup, the final handshake must still involve foreign powers. That liberation must always be followed by approval. They were rejecting the blueprint. And what do you do when a nation achieves stability, but its people chant for revolution? You panic, quietly, diplomatically, behind curtains. Because the moment a name like Traoré's gets that kind of applause in a country like Gabon, it signals something far more dangerous than instability. It signals a split in reality. There's the official version, the one printed in press releases and spoken at air-conditioned summits. And then there's the real version, the one shouted by young men in the street, the one carried in whispers through marketplaces, the one that refuses to be translated into diplomatic language. That crowd told us something that day, and what they told us was this: Gabon's inauguration wasn't a return to normal. It was a front line in a much larger war for Africa's soul. One side wears medals and carries French handshakes in their briefcases. The other side, they wear dust, they carry dreams, and they chant names like Traoré when no one asks them to. And that brings us to a deeper question, one that the cameras will never ask. Why is a man like Traoré more electrifying in Gabon than Gabon's president? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. There's a reason Ibrahim Traoré's name doesn't land softly. It doesn't echo politely like some diplomatic slogan. It hits like thunder, sharp, rebellious, raw. When the crowd in Libreville erupted at his name, it wasn't about Burkina Faso. It wasn't even about Gabon. It was about what Africa has been craving but denied for decades: a leader who doesn't flinch. In a continent suffocated by polite puppets, Traoré walked onto the stage of history and refused the script. No teleprompter, no Western handlers, no empty gestures coded in globalist smiles, and that alone, that refusal to bow, makes him dangerous. Because in Africa, politics has always been a game of permissions. Who allowed you to speak? Who endorsed your win? Who backed your reforms? You can run a country, but unless Paris signs off, you don't govern. That's the quiet truth Traoré bulldozed. So when his name was spoken in Gabon, the people didn't hear just a man. They heard a verdict. A guilty verdict against every leader who still acts like their independence must be negotiated in French. Traoré is young. Too young, they said. Too inexperienced. Too military. But that's exactly what made him unavoidable. Because he didn't climb a ladder. He kicked it down and built his own. The youth in Africa, in Gabon, in Congo, in Togo, they see themselves in him. Not in his medals, not in his uniform, but in his defiance. He sounds like them, looks like them, walks like them. No filters, no diplomatic training wheels. He speaks to the pain they live with every day. Jobless growth, foreign-controlled mining towns, security outsourced to drones, policies written in Europe and dumped like trash onto African parliaments. And unlike the usual suspects, those tired old generals turned presidents, those exiled billionaires returning for elections, Traoré didn't ask for anyone's blessing. He took his power like it was owed to him, not gifted. That terrifies the African elite, because their survival depends on pretending that people love them. But how can they pretend when a foreign leader's name gets more applause than their entire national anthem? This is no longer about Burkina Faso. This is a test of relevance, and many African presidents are failing it. There's a reason we call them puppet leaders, because their loyalty isn't to their soil, it's to the wire holding them up. Whether it's the French embassy, the EU's development programs, or a USAID-funded youth initiative that promises nothing but recycled poverty with a digital logo, they've built careers out of being compliant, silent, predictable. Traoré, he's none of that. He walks into summits late, uninvited. He rejects aid. He calls out the West publicly, not in private briefings or confidential memos, but in front of cameras. His enemies try to call him reckless. But to millions of Africans, he finally looks like someone not afraid to lose their job. That matters. Because in Africa, courage isn't common in politics. Survival is. Ministers don't speak unless they're sure no one will be offended. Presidents apologize before they govern. But Traoré? He governs like he owes nothing to anyone but his people. That energy travels. It explains why someone in Gabon would shout his name louder than their president. Because they're not cheering for a flag. They're cheering for a feeling, one they've been starved of for decades. Ownership. Ownership of land, of decisions, of the future. And here's the quiet part. No one says out loud, Ibrahim Traoré doesn't have to lead your country to make you feel like you've taken it back. His very existence makes weak leaders look like shadows, and shadows hate the light. This is why they fear him. This is why the West tries to ignore him or reduce him to headlines about military rule or populism. Because they know that his kind of popularity can't be bought, contained, or copied. It must be earned in fire. And every time his name is chanted in a country he doesn't govern, another puppet president feels his chair wobble. Now the question becomes, what happens when a continent doesn't just erupt at the sound of one man's name, but starts acting on what he stands for? Because Gabon's crowd didn't just celebrate Traoré, they exposed something. They exposed hunger, and hunger always spreads. Traoré didn't need to cross a border to cause trouble. The virus he carries, the one elites fear most, isn't biological. It's ideological. And like all powerful ideas, it spreads without permission. It used to be easy. Countries were boxed in. ECOWAS over here, Central African states over there, each with their presidents, uniforms, and pretend sovereignty. But Traoré, And the Alliance of Sahel States AES he helped shape smashed those borders wide open, not with armies, but with clarity, with language, with intent. And that's exactly what Gabon is beginning to feel. Because whether its leaders admit it or not, Gabon is already infected. Not by a coup, not by sanctions, but by doubt, the kind that grows slowly, then detonates overnight. You could hear it in the chants at the inauguration. You could feel it in the uneasy glances exchanged by politicians when the name Traore turned the crowd. And you can trace it in the shifting conversations happening across Libreville's markets, university dorms, and even military barracks. People are starting to ask questions they never dared ask before. Why are we still exporting oil and importing poverty? Why do we have peace treaties but no peace? Why does France always show up during our elections, but disappear when our youth are unemployed, our streets flood, or our forests burn? These aren't AES questions. These are African questions. But it's the AES spirit, that raw refusal to keep playing the colonizer's game, that has given those questions teeth. And the elite in Gabon, they know it. Gabon may not be part of the AES alliance, not on paper, but politics doesn't happen on paper anymore. It happens in the friction between people and power. And every chant for Traore at that inauguration was a spark in dry grass. Let's be honest, Gabon is ripe. The country just went through a military transition. General Brice Oligui Nguema came to power after ousting President Ali Bongo, ending a 56-year political dynasty back to the bone by France. That transition shocked the world, but not because of the coup, but because of how easily it happened. That's what scares the system. The ease. No violent uprising, no protracted resistance, just a smooth transfer of power, as if the country had long since given up pretending that democracy meant anything more than staged elections and offshore bank accounts. But that's the danger. When people get a taste of power shifting hands without blood, they begin to imagine it happening again and again, until real change finally takes root. Now imagine that same population watching Traoré reject foreign aid, build his national bank, refuse French protection, and expose coup plots, all while looking like a brother, not a boss. Imagine how that feels to a Gabonese citizen still waiting for power to be more than a ceremony. The idea that Gabon could follow Burkina Faso's path isn't a fantasy. It's math. One spark, one chant, one unpopular IMF deal away. Already the blueprint has changed. It used to be that military takeovers had to apologize. Now they get clapped for, if they serve the people, not their foreign handlers. That's the AES effect. Not just alliance by treaty, alliance by imagination. And imagination is dangerous. It redefines what's possible. Once you see someone break the chains, you stop believing yours are unbreakable. So what does this mean for Gabon? It means the elites are sitting on a time bomb, a silent one, made not of C4, but of consciousness. They've delayed reforms. They've reshuffled faces. But the system remains the same. And every time someone like Traoré speaks, that system looks older, rustier, weaker. And the soldiers? Don't forget them. Africa's modern political shifts aren't being dictated by diplomats anymore. They're being shaped by captains, colonels, and commanders tired of escorting presidents who sign contracts they don't understand in languages they don't speak. AES didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in barracks. If Gabon's soldiers start feeling the way Burkina Faso's did, it won't be a question of if. It'll be a question of who next. So no, Gabon isn't AES, but it doesn't need to be, because the spirit is already inside. Now let's talk about the international impact Traoré is making. They won't say it on camera, but behind closed doors, in NATO briefing rooms and EU security meetings, one African name keeps showing up on classified reports, flagged, underlined, debated. Ibrahim Traoré, not because of any missile launch, not because he cut the oil supply or hacked any system. No, it's much simpler than that. He's feared because he's real. Because in a world addicted to puppets and proxies, Traoré doesn't answer the phone when Washington calls. He doesn't flatter the French. He doesn't negotiate his sovereignty with a bow tie and a checklist. And worst of all, he's popular for it. The crowd that erupted in Gabon didn't just send a message to African elites. They sent one straight into the heart of Europe's intelligence community. your firewall is failing. Because let's not pretend that France, the US, or the EU see Africa as a continent of equals. They see it as a chessboard, with natural resources, strategic positioning, and political assets to manage. Traoré? He flipped the board. What's terrifying about him isn't that he leads Burkina Faso. It's that he's leading a narrative, and narratives can't be sanctioned. You can cut off aid, you can smear a man's name on Reuters, you can cancel military deals, but you can't cancel a contagious idea. And this is what the Western military-industrial complex is quietly confronting. That Traoré isn't a threat because of what he controls, but because of what he inspires. When youth in Gabon shout his name, it creates a problem that no drone strike can fix. It means they're thinking for themselves. It means they're comparing. And worse, they're choosing. They're choosing authenticity over protocol, sovereignty over speeches, action over apologies. To NATO, that's destabilizing. To the IMF, that's dangerous. To the African Union, embarrassing. So now Traoré's name lives in two places, on the lips of the hopeful and in the files of the frightened. Inside Brussels, policy analysts are scrambling to figure out how to contain the AES movement. Not militarily, at least not yet, but psychologically. The goal isn't to kill Traoré, the goal is to kill what he represents. Discredit him, call him a dictator, say his junta threatens democracy, spread rumors, push narratives that associate him with instability, highlight every economic problem in Burkina Faso while ignoring the fact that those problems were inherited from decades of Western economic strangulation. And yet, it's not working. Because people aren't just listening to Traoré, they're watching who hates him. Let's talk about tactics. There are already whispers of containment strategies, pressure on neighboring governments to distance themselves from AES, threats of trade blocs, secret promises of military gear in exchange for stability, quiet funding of opposition groups. It's textbook, the kind of foreign interference the West never admits, but always deploys when a black man stands up without strings. Because here's the thing, it was never about coups. It was about control. The West never cared how power was taken, only who it served after the dust settled. If a military leader pledged loyalty to Paris or hosted AFRICOM bases, suddenly he was a transitional figure. But when one like Traoré kicks them out and refuses to kneel, now he's a problem, a threat. But the truth is simpler. He's unmanageable. And the Western world doesn't know how to manage a continent that stopped asking for permission. The eruption in Gabon wasn't just noise, it was data. A spike on the intelligence radar. Proof that the Traoré effect is working, that it's outgrowing borders, mutating, gaining speed. And the louder his name gets in foreign countries, the harder it becomes to erase. And they've tried. Shadow bans, dismissive headlines, strategic silence. But none of it works when his absence is louder than their presence. When a man doesn't attend an event, yet his name hijacks it, that's not politics anymore. That's mythology in real time. And mythology is dangerous because it gives the people something they haven't had in decades: hope with teeth. So what's next? They'll try to box him in, trap him with diplomacy, isolate him with narratives. But unless they cut the internet and gag every young African on the continent, they've already lost control. Because this was never about stopping Traoré. It was about stopping the feeling of Traoré. And now, it's everywhere. Do you think this is a sign that Africans everywhere want leaders like Traoré? Let us know in the comment section. How do you think Africa's current leaders will react to this rising wave? Will they adapt or be swept away? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.